Under the merciless Texas sun, seasoned cowboy Ethan Cole spots something that stops him cold. A small girl abandoned on the dusty roadside, her twisted legs stretched before her, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. The settlers who promised to protect her after her parents died had ridden on without looking back, deeming her injury too much burden for their westward dreams. Now Ethan faces a choice that will define him: ride past like the others, or carry the weight of one more broken soul into his already haunted life. If you're watching from somewhere in this big world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far Lily's story can travel. And if her journey moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The heat shimmered off the hard pan in waves thick enough to taste, turning the horizon into a dancing mirage of false water and broken promises. Ethan Cole had been riding since dawn, his horse's hooves striking a rhythm against the cracked earth that matched the steady ache in his chest, the kind of pain that had nothing to do with the miles and everything to do with the years. He was 42 years old and looked every day of it. His face was weathered leather, creased at the corners of eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. The scar along his jaw, a gift from a Comanche knife during his army days, caught the light when he turned his head, a pale reminder that survival often came at the cost of something you couldn't get back. The ranch he was returning to sat another day's ride north, a sprawling piece of scrubland and stubborn hope that he and Samuel Ortega had carved from nothing over 15 years. It wasn't much: a main house that leaked when it rained hard, corrals that needed constant mending, and cattle that were more trouble than profit most years. But it was his, and that mattered in a way that little else did anymore. Ethan had been in San Antonio selling off a small herd, and the money pouch at his hip represented 3 months of hard work. He was looking forward to a hot meal, a cold drink, and maybe a week without having to think too hard about anything that mattered. Then he saw her. At first he thought it was a coyote or a stray dog, something small and still beneath the scraggly mesquite tree that clung to life on the roadside. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made his hands tighten on the reins. A child. She sat with her back against the tree trunk, one leg stretched straight before her at an angle that looked wrong even from a distance. Her dress, once probably a pale blue, was now the color of the dust that covered everything out here. Dark hair hung in tangles around a face streaked with tears and dirt, and her hands rested limp in her lap as if she'd simply given up. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet away and sat for a long moment, studying the scene. There were wagon tracks in the road, maybe half a day old, heading west. No bodies, no belongings scattered around. Just the girl, alone beneath the inadequate shade of a dying tree. Every instinct told him to keep riding. Out here, you learned quick that stopping for every piece of trouble you came across was a fast way to end up in trouble yourself. The frontier was littered with the bones of good Samaritans who'd made the mistake of thinking their charity mattered more than their caution. But something about the stillness of her, the absolute resignation in the slump of her small shoulders, pulled at him in a way he couldn't ignore. He dismounted slowly, making noise with his spurs so she'd hear him coming. When he was close enough to see her clearly, he stopped again. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her face was thin, cheekbones sharp beneath skin burned dark by the sun. But it was her eyes that struck him, pale gray, like creek water in winter, and far too old for the face they occupied. "You hurt?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, unused to gentle conversation. She flinched at the sound but didn't look away. "My leg," she said quietly. "It's always been twisted. I was born that way." Ethan glanced at the limb in question. Even through the torn fabric of her dress, he could see the deformity, the foot turned inward, the knee locked at an unnatural angle. "Where's your folks?" Something flickered across her face, grief so raw it was painful to witness. "Dead. Fever took them both 3 weeks ago, just after we joined the wagon train in Louisiana." "And the wagon train?" He already knew the answer, but he needed to hear her say it. "They left me." Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact, as if she was reporting the weather. "Mr. Henderson," he was the wagon master, "said I was slowing everyone down. Said they had to make Oregon before the snows came, and they couldn't afford to wait for a crippled girl who couldn't even walk right." The casual cruelty of it hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd seen plenty of hard decisions made on the trail, people left behind who were too sick to travel, supplies abandoned when the load got too heavy. But a child whose only crime was being born with a twisted leg. When did they leave you? Yesterday morning, she looked up at the sky, squinting against the brutal sun. I thought maybe they'd come back, that maybe Mr. Henderson would change his mind, but they didn't. Ethan crouched down, bringing himself to her level. Up close, he could see the dehydration in the papery texture of her skin, the way her lips were cracked and bleeding. She'd been without water for more than a day in this heat. Another night, and she'd be dead. What's your name? Lily. Lily Grant. She studied him with those ancient eyes. Are you going to leave me too? The question was asked without accusation, just a simple request for information from someone who'd learned not to expect much from the world. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his chest. He thought about his own daughter, Emma, who would have been about this age if the cholera hadn't taken her 6 years back. Thought about how she'd loved animals and always pestered him to bring home strays. Thought about how his wife, Sarah, had cried for days after they buried their little girl in the rocky soil behind the ranch house. He thought about riding away, about how easy it would be to convince himself this wasn't his problem, about how bringing a crippled child to a working ranch made no practical sense whatsoever. Then he thought about what kind of man he'd be if he did. No, he said finally. I'm not going to leave you. He saw the disbelief flash across her face, followed immediately by hope so desperate it nearly broke him. You mean it? I mean it. He straightened, looking down at her. But we need to get you water and shade before you cook out here. Can you stand it all? A little, if I have something to lean on. She reached up toward the tree trunk, trying to pull herself upright, but her arms were too weak from hunger and dehydration. Ethan didn't hesitate. He bent and scooped her up, surprised by how little she weighed. She was all sharp angles and fragile bones, light as a sack of kindling. She stiffened in his arms, clearly unused to being carried, but she didn't protest. He settled her across his saddle, then swung up behind her. His horse, a patient gelding named Roan, who'd seen everything from Apache raids to stampedes, accepted the extra weight without complaint. There's a creek about 3 miles north, Ethan said, adjusting his hold so Lily wouldn't slide. We'll stop there, get you cleaned up and fed. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Lily didn't respond, but he felt her relax slightly against him. They rode in silence, the only sounds the steady clop of Roan's hooves and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. When they reached the creek, little more than a trickle this late in summer, but enough, Ethan dismounted and helped Lily down. He spread his bedroll beneath a cottonwood tree and settled her on it, then dug through his saddlebags for his canteen and the last of the jerky he'd been saving. Slow sips, he warned as he handed her the canteen. You drink too fast and you'll just bring it back up. She obeyed, taking careful swallows while he watched. Color began returning to her cheeks, the grayish pallor fading to something closer to healthy tan. When she'd had enough water, he gave her a piece of jerky. Chew it slow. Let your stomach remember what food feels like. While she ate, Ethan busied himself with Roan, loosening the saddle, checking the gelding's hooves, anything to keep his hands occupied while he thought. He hadn't planned on this, hadn't planned on any of this. But here he was, and here she was, and there was no undoing the choice he'd made back on that dusty road. Mister? He turned to find Lily watching him, the jerky half-eaten in her small hands. You can call me Ethan. Mister makes me feel older than I already am. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Ethan, then. Where are you taking me? My ranch. About a day's ride from here. He moved back to the bedroll and sat down, his back against the cottonwood trunk. It's not much. Just me and my partner Samuel, a few head of cattle, and more work than 2 men can handle. But there's a roof that mostly keeps the rain out and enough food to go around. What about after that? The question was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. This was a child who'd learned to think ahead, to plan for worst-case scenarios. Ethan sighed, pulling his hat off and running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Honestly, Lily, I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. I just knew I couldn't leave you to die on the side of the road. She considered this, chewing thoughtfully on her jerky. "I can work," she said finally. "I know I can't do heavy things because of my leg, but I'm smart. My mama taught me to read and do figures, and I'm good with animals. They don't mind that I'm different." There was no self-pity in her voice, just a practical assessment of her abilities. It reminded Ethan of the way soldiers talked after a battle, cataloging their injuries without emotion because dwelling on them wouldn't change anything. "We'll figure it out," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "One day at a time. That's all any of us can do out here anyway." They rested for another hour, waiting for the worst heat of the day to pass. Lily dozed fitfully, her body finally relaxing now that she had water and food. Ethan kept watch, his eyes scanning the horizon out of habit more than real concern. This stretch of country was relatively quiet. Most of the raiding had moved further west, and the army patrols kept the worst of the trouble tamped down. When the sun started its descent toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with this hard land in the first place, Ethan gently shook Lily awake. "Time to move. We can make another 10 miles before dark if we push." She nodded, rubbing sleep from her eyes. He helped her back onto roan, and they set off again, this time with Lily sitting more comfortably in front of him, her small body fitting naturally into the space between his arms as he held the reins. "Tell me about your ranch," she said after a while, her voice barely audible over the sound of the horse's steady gait. So he did. He told her about the main house that he and Samuel had built together, about the barn that had survived 3 tornadoes and a flash flood, about the cattle that were half longhorn and half stubborn meanness. He told her about Samuel, who'd been a vaquero in Mexico before a range war had sent him north looking for safer work, and who could do things with a rope that bordered on magic. He didn't tell her about Sarah and Emma. Didn't tell her that every corner of that ranch held memories that could still drop him to his knees if he wasn't careful. Didn't tell her that the reason he'd been in San Antonio was partly to sell cattle and partly to outrun ghosts that had names and faces and favorite songs they'd sing while doing dishes. Some stories weren't ready to be told yet. They made camp that night under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had punched holes in a black blanket and hung it over the world. Ethan built a small fire and made coffee, while Lily sat on his bedroll, watching him with those disconcerting gray eyes. "My papa used to make coffee," she said suddenly. "He said it was the only thing that made mornings worth facing." Ethan poured some into his tin cup and handed it to her. "Your daddy was a smart man." She took a sip and made a face. "It's bitter." "Life's bitter sometimes. Coffee's just honest about it." He poured himself a cup and settled across the fire from her. "Tell me about them. Your folks." Lily was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, slowly, words began to emerge, tentative at first, then gaining strength like a creek after rainfall. Her father had been a teacher in Louisiana, her mother a seamstress. They'd sold everything to join the wagon train, dreaming of land in Oregon where they could start fresh, where her father could teach and her mother could sew, and Lily could grow up somewhere that didn't treat her twisted leg like a curse from heaven. The fever had come on fast, first her mother, then her father. Within a week, both were dead and buried in shallow graves along the trail, marked only by crude wooden crosses that would rot and fall within a season. "Mr. Henderson said he'd look after me," Lily said, staring into the fire. "He promised my papa right before he died, but I think he forgot as soon as we put them in the ground." Some men's promises aren't worth the breath it takes to make them. "Are your promises worth something?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at her across the flames, this small broken thing that had already learned to measure a man's worth by his actions rather than his words. "I try to make them so," he said finally. "Can't say I've always succeeded, but I try." She nodded, as if this satisfied her. They finished their coffee in silence, and when Lily's eyes began to droop, Ethan made her a bed from his blankets and his saddle. She was asleep within minutes, curled on her side like a child half her age, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Ethan sat up late, drinking coffee and watching the fire burn down to coals. He thought about the choice he'd made, about what it would mean to bring a crippled child to a working ranch. Samuel would understand. The man had a soft heart beneath his gruff exterior. But neighbors might talk, might question why a widower was taking in a young girl who wasn't kin. Let them talk, he decided. He'd spent too many years caring what people thought, and it had never done him a lick of good. When he finally lay down to sleep, his dreams were restless things, full of wagon trains and empty roads, and Sarah's voice asking him why he hadn't saved their Emma the way he was saving this stranger's child. He woke before dawn with the old familiar ache in his chest, and the knowledge that there was no good answer to that question. They reached the ranch late the following afternoon. The land here was different from the flat emptiness they'd crossed. Rolling hills covered in scrub oak and mesquite, with limestone outcroppings that glowed white in the sun. The main house sat in a shallow valley, backed by a line of cottonwoods that marked the creek running through the property. Lily sat up straighter in the saddle as they approached, taking in everything with keen interest. Ethan saw it through her eyes, the weathered wood of the house and barn, the corrals holding a dozen horses, the scattering of chickens in the yard, and beyond it all, the wide Texas sky that seemed to go on forever. Samuel emerged from the barn as they rode up, wiping his hands on a rag and squinting against the sun. He was a lean man in his 50s, all sinew and bone, with silver threading through his black hair and a face that had been handsome before life had carved its stories there. "Boss," he said, his accent turning the word musical. Then his eyes found Lily, and his expression shifted to surprise. "Who's this?" "This is Lily Grant." Ethan dismounted and reached up to help her down. "Found her on the road. She'll be staying with us." To Samuel's credit, he didn't ask the 100 questions that must have been running through his mind. He just nodded, stepped forward, and offered Lily a slight bow. "Welcome to the Double C, Senorita. I am Samuel Ortega, and I am very pleased to meet you." Lily's eyes widened slightly at the formal greeting, but she managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Ortega." "Just Samuel, por favor. We are not so fancy here." He glanced at Ethan. "She looks hungry. I made stew." "She is hungry," Ethan confirmed, "and tired, and probably ready to be anywhere that isn't a saddle." Samuel's face softened. "Come, pequeña. Let's get some food in you and find you a proper place to rest." He led the way into the house, and Ethan followed with Lily. The interior was neat, Samuel's doing since Ethan tended to let things pile up, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and 2 smaller rooms off to the side that had been bedrooms once. Samuel ladled stew into bowls while Ethan helped Lily into a chair at the rough wooden table. She ate slowly, methodically, as if afraid the food might disappear if she enjoyed it too much. "Where did you find her?" Samuel asked quietly, standing near the stove where Lily couldn't hear. "About 40 miles south. Wagon train left her on the roadside." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Bastardos." "My thoughts exactly." Ethan poured himself coffee from the pot that was always on the stove. "I couldn't just leave her there." "No, you could not." Samuel studied Lily with gentle eyes. "She can have Emma's room. It's small, but the roof doesn't leak and the window catches the morning light." The offer made Ethan's throat tight. Emma's room had sat untouched for 6 years, preserved like a shrine to a life cut short. Sarah had kept it exactly as it was the day their daughter died, and after Sarah's own death 2 years later, Ethan hadn't had the heart to change anything. "You sure?" "Emma would have liked her," Samuel said simply, "and keeping a room empty doesn't bring her back. You know this, Jefe." He was right, of course, but knowing something and accepting it were different things entirely. That night, after they'd shown Lily to the small bedroom and given her water to wash up, Ethan and Samuel sat on the porch, watching the sunset and drinking the whiskey Ethan had brought back from San Antonio. "What's the plan?" Samuel asked. "Don't have one yet. Just seemed like the right thing to do at the time." "The right thing often is inconvenient." Samuel took a sip of whiskey. "People will talk. Let them. The girl will need things, clothes, a bed that doesn't hurt her leg, maybe a crutch or something to help her walk." "I know. And we're not exactly swimming in money after that hard winter." "I know that too, Samuel." Ethan's voice came out sharper than intended. He took a breath. "I'm sorry. I couldn't leave her. You understand?" "I understand." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I had a daughter once, in Mexico, before the war. She would be about Lily's age now, if she had lived." It was the first time Samuel had ever mentioned having a child. In all their years working together, he'd kept his past carefully locked away. What happened? Fever, like Lily's parents. Samuel stared out at the darkening horizon. My wife died trying to birth our second child. I lost them both in one night. After that, there was nothing to keep me in Mexico except memories that hurt too much to face. I'm sorry, amigo. We are all sorry for something out here. Samuel stood, stretching his back with an audible crack. But maybe this girl, she is a chance to be sorry for something different, something better. He went inside, leaving Ethan alone with the crickets and the stars and the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. In Emma's room, in Lily's room now, the small girl lay awake in a real bed for the first time in weeks. The mattress was thin and the blankets smelled of cedar and thyme, but it was softer than the ground and safer than the roadside. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like spilled sugar. Her mother used to tell her that stars were the souls of good people, watching over those they'd left behind. Lily hoped it was true. Hoped her parents could see her now, in this strange place with these strange men who'd shown her more kindness in 2 days than the wagon train had in 3 weeks. Her leg ached. It always ached. But the pain felt different here. Bearable somehow. As if the simple act of being wanted, of being chosen instead of abandoned, had taken some of the hurt away. She thought about Ethan, about the roughness of his voice and the gentleness of his hands, about Samuel, who'd bowed to her like she was someone important instead of just a crippled burden. And for the first time since her parents died, Lily Grant let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything might actually be okay. Outside, the Texas night settled over the Double C Ranch like a blanket, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote sang its lonely song to the moon. The first week passed in a careful dance of adjustment, each person finding their place in the new rhythm of the household. Lily woke each morning to the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee, simple pleasures that felt like luxuries after weeks of uncertainty. She would lie in bed for a few moments, letting the morning light stream through the window, still half convinced she might wake to find herself back on that dusty roadside. But the room remained solid around her, the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, the faded quilt tucked under her chin, the photograph on the wall of a couple she didn't recognize but somehow knew must have been important to Ethan. The house creaked and settled in the cool morning air, alive with the sounds of men already at work. Samuel was always up first, building the fire and starting breakfast before the sun had fully cleared the eastern hills. He moved through the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd spent years cooking for himself, and he never complained when Lily appeared in the doorway, balanced precariously on the makeshift crutch he'd fashioned from an old broom handle and strips of leather. "Buenos dias, pequeña," he'd say without turning around, somehow always knowing when she entered. "Sit, the eggs are almost ready." Ethan was harder to read. He spoke little at breakfast, his attention focused on his coffee and whatever mental list of tasks he was composing for the day. But Lily noticed the small kindnesses, how he always made sure her chair was pulled close enough to the table that she wouldn't have to stretch, how he'd set the honey jar within easy reach because he'd seen her put it on her biscuits, how his eyes would track her movement across the room as if making sure she wouldn't fall. On the 4th day, he'd appeared in the barn where she'd been sitting on a bale of hay, watching Samuel work with one of the horses. In his hands was a proper crutch, carefully carved and sanded smooth, with padding wrapped around the top. "Try this," he'd said, offering it to her. "Should fit better than that stick Samuel rigged up." Lily had taken it, running her fingers over the wood. She could see the care in every detail, the way it had been shaped to fit under her arm, the leather straps that would keep it secure, the rubber tip on the bottom that Samuel must have salvaged from something else. "You made this?" "Wasn't doing anything else after dark." He'd shifted his weight, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "If it doesn't fit right, I can adjust it." She'd stood, testing the crutch, and for the first time in her life, walking felt less like a struggle and more like something she might actually master. "It's perfect." Something had flickered across Ethan's face then, too quick to name, but it had looked almost like relief. Now, a week into her stay, Lily was beginning to understand the shape of life on the Double C. The days followed a pattern as reliable as the sunrise, feeding the animals, mending fences, checking on the cattle that roamed the far pastures, and 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. It was hard work, the kind that left both men exhausted by evening, but there was a rhythm to it that Lily found comforting. She'd discovered early on that sitting idle made her anxious, so she began looking for ways to be useful. Her twisted leg prevented her from doing heavy labor, but her hands worked fine and her mind was sharp. She started small, collecting eggs from the hen house, a task that required patience rather than strength, since the hens were temperamental about strangers. The first time she'd returned with a basket full of eggs, not a single one broken, Samuel had looked genuinely impressed. "The chickens, they do not like most people," he'd said, examining her haul, "but they seem to like you well enough." "I just talked to them," Lily had explained. "My mama said animals understand tone even if they don't understand words. So I told them I wasn't going to hurt them, that I just needed their eggs and I'd be gentle about it." Samuel had laughed, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Your mama was a wise woman." From eggs, Lily graduated to other tasks. She learned to churn butter, her arms aching from the repetitive motion, but her pride swelling when the cream finally transformed into something solid and useful. She helped Samuel in the garden, pulling weeds and watering the vegetables that somehow survived in the harsh Texas soil. She even tried her hand at mending, though her stitches were uneven and Samuel had to redo most of her work. But it was with the animals that she truly found her place. The ranch had a small herd of horses, working animals mostly, sturdy and sensible rather than beautiful. There was Rowan, Ethan's steady gelding, and a mare named Copper who had a foal at her side. There were 3 other horses used for herding cattle, each with their own personality and quirks. And then there was Ghost. Lily first saw the gray stallion on her 5th day at the ranch. She'd been in the barn, trying to figure out how to carry water buckets with only one free hand, when she'd heard a commotion from one of the far stalls. The sound of hooves striking wood, a shrill whinny that spoke of fear or anger or both. "Stay back from that one," Samuel had warned, appearing at her elbow. "He's not safe." "What's wrong with him?" "Previous owner beat him badly. Ethan bought him off a man in town who was going to shoot him for being too wild." Samuel shook his head. "We've had him 6 months, and he still won't let anyone near him. Ethan keeps hoping he'll settle, but I think some things are broken too badly to fix." Lily had moved closer to the stall despite the warning, her crutch tapping against the packed dirt floor. Ghost had pressed himself into the far corner, his eyes rolling white, his entire body trembling. She could see the scars on his flanks, the places where a whip or spurs had cut deep. "Hey there," she'd said softly, keeping her voice low and calm the way she did with the chickens. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." The horse had snorted, tossing his head, but his ears had flickered forward slightly, listening. "I know what it's like," Lily had continued, speaking as much to herself as to the animal. "When people hurt you just because they can, when they decide you're not worth the trouble of being kind to." She'd stood there for a long time just talking, about the wagon train, about her parents, about the feeling of being left behind. The horse had gradually stopped trembling, his breathing slowing to something closer to normal. When Samuel had finally pulled her away for dinner, Ghost had been standing at the front of his stall, watching her leave with dark, intelligent eyes. The next day, she'd asked Ethan if she could feed the horses. "Ghost bites," he'd warned, "and he kicks. Samuel's right. He's not safe." "I'll be careful." "Lily, please, I think I can help him." Ethan had studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, but you stay outside the stall. Slide the food through the gap at the bottom, and if he charges the gate, you get yourself away from there immediately. Understood?" "Understood." So began a routine that would change everything. Every morning and evening, Lily made her way to Ghost's stall with grain and fresh hay. She never tried to enter, never reached through the bars, just set the food down and talked while he ate. She told him about Louisiana, about the long journey west, about learning to read from her father and sew from her mother. She told him about the pain in her leg that never fully went away, about the stares from strangers who looked at her like she was something broken and pitiful. "But I'm not broken," she said one evening, watching Ghost eat from his corner. "And neither are you. Hurt, maybe. Scared, definitely, but not broken. There's a difference." Ghost raised his head, grain still clinging to his muzzle, and looked at her. Really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. People think if something's damaged, it's not worth saving, Lily continued. But my papa used to say that the things worth saving most are the ones that have already survived the worst. They're stronger for it, even if the scars don't always show. The horse took a step toward the front of the stall, then another. Lily held her breath, forcing herself to remain still even as her heart hammered in her chest. Ghost stopped at the gate, close enough that she could have reached through and touched him if she'd been foolish enough to try. He lowered his head, breathing in her scent, his nostrils flaring. "That's right," she whispered. "Just me, just Lily, and I swear on my mama's memory I will never hurt you." She didn't touch him that day, or the next, or the day after that. But each evening, Ghost came a little closer, stayed a little longer, his wariness gradually giving way to something that might have been curiosity. On the 10th day, Ethan found her in the barn just as the sun was setting. She was standing at Ghost's stall, her hand extended palm up through the bars, and the gray stallion was allowing her to stroke the soft skin of his muzzle. "I'll be damned," Ethan breathed. Lily turned, a smile breaking across her face. "He let me touch him, really touch him, not just brush against him by accident." "I can see that." Ethan moved closer, slowly so as not to spook the horse. Ghost's ears went back slightly, but he didn't retreat. "What did you do?" "I just talked to him, let him see that I wasn't going to hurt him." She ran her fingers along the stallion's nose, marveling at the softness of his coat. "I think he was lonely. I think he wanted to trust someone but didn't know how anymore." Ethan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion Lily couldn't quite identify. "You've got a gift, little one. A real gift." That night at dinner, Samuel raised his glass of water in a mock toast. "To Lily, who has done what two grown men could not. You have earned your place here, Pequeña." Lily felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since before her parents died. Pride, she realized, and belonging. But not everyone in the valley was pleased with the arrangement. The trouble started 2 weeks after Lily's arrival, when Ethan rode into town for supplies. He'd taken her along, partly because she needed fabric for new dresses. The one she'd been wearing when he found her was nearly rags, and partly because he thought she might enjoy seeing other people. The town of Cedar Springs was small, just a main street lined with wooden buildings that seemed to lean on each other for support. There was a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a church at the far end that looked newer than everything else. Ethan helped Lily down from the wagon, and she balanced on her crutch while he tied the horses. She could feel eyes on her immediately, women in their Sunday dresses pausing in their conversations, men stopping their work to stare. The attention made her skin prickle with familiar discomfort. "Ignore them," Ethan said quietly, offering his arm. "Small towns love gossip, and we've given them something to talk about." Inside the general store, a woman behind the counter looked up from her ledger. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Ethan Cole," she said, her tone neutral. "Haven't seen you in town for a while." "Mrs. Patterson, need to stock up on supplies." He guided Lily toward the dry goods. "And the girl here needs fabric for some dresses." Mrs. Patterson's gaze shifted to Lily, sharp and assessing. "And who might this be?" "Lily Grant. She's staying at the ranch." "Is that so?" The woman came around the counter, her skirts rustling. "Where's she from?" "Louisiana originally. Her parents died on the wagon train west." Ethan's voice carried a warning edge. "Train abandoned her. I found her and brought her home." "How charitable of you." Mrs. Patterson's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Though some might wonder about a widowed man taking in a young girl. People talk, you know." "Let them talk." "I'm just saying, appearances matter, especially in a small community like ours." She turned her attention to Lily, looking her up and down. "Can you work, child? Or are you just another mouth to feed?" Lily felt her face flush, but she kept her voice steady. "I can work, ma'am. I collect eggs and help in the garden, and I'm learning to churn butter." "Learning to?" Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested this was not the same as actually being able to. "And that leg of yours, were you born that way, or is it from an injury?" "I was born with it." "Pity. Makes you less useful, I imagine." The casual cruelty of the comment hit Lily like a slap. She'd heard similar things before, People had never been shy about pointing out her deficiencies, but somehow it hurt more here, in front of Ethan. "She's more useful than most people twice her age," Ethan said coldly. "Now, are you going to sell us what we need, or do I need to ride to the next town over?" Mrs. Patterson's expression soured, but she gestured toward the fabric. "Help yourself. Prices are marked." They spent the next 20 minutes gathering supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and several yards of sturdy cotton fabric in blues and browns. Lily picked out what she thought would be practical, nothing fancy or frivolous, aware of Mrs. Patterson's disapproving gaze the entire time. As Ethan was paying, the door opened and a man walked in. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a sheriff's badge that caught the light. His face was handsome in a hard way, all sharp angles and narrow eyes. "Cole," he said, nodding. "Heard you were back from San Antonio." "Sheriff Dalton." Ethan's tone was carefully neutral. The sheriff's attention shifted to Lily, and something unpleasant flickered across his features. "This the girl everyone's talking about?" "This is Lily Grant." "Found her on the road, I hear. Just picked her up and brought her home like a stray puppy." Dalton's smile was thin. "That's mighty noble of you, Cole. Mighty noble indeed." "Is there a point to this conversation, Sheriff?" "Just making sure everything's above board. You know how people get when a single man starts taking in young girls. Questions arise." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Lily needed help. I provided it. There's nothing more to it than that." "I'm sure that's true." Dalton leaned against the counter, his posture deliberately casual. "But you might want to think about appearances. Maybe find her a proper home with a family. A woman's influence and all that." "She has a proper home, with me and Samuel. 2 old bachelors raising a little girl. You don't see how that might look peculiar?" The tension in the room had become thick enough to cut. Lily felt her hands trembling and gripped her crutch tighter, willing herself not to cry. "What looks peculiar to me," Ethan said slowly, his voice dangerously quiet, "is a sheriff who seems more interested in gossip than actual lawbreaking. Lily stays with me. End of discussion." Dalton straightened, his smile disappearing. "Just trying to look out for the community's best interests, Cole. No need to get defensive. And I'm looking out for a child who's already lost everything. So unless you've got actual business with me, we're done here." They stared at each other for a long moment, and Lily had the distinct impression she was witnessing something larger than a simple disagreement. There was history here, old wounds that had nothing to do with her. Finally, Dalton shrugged. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you when the gossip gets worse." He tipped his hat to Mrs. Patterson and left, the door swinging shut behind him with more force than necessary. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Lily sat beside Ethan on the wagon seat, the supplies piled in the back, and tried to make sense of what had happened. The hostility had been unexpected, the casual cruelty of strangers toward someone they didn't even know. "I'm sorry," she said finally, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her. "What for?" "For causing problems. For making people talk." "Lily, you haven't done anything wrong. People like Mrs. Patterson and Sheriff Dalton, they're small-minded and scared of anything that doesn't fit into their neat little boxes." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "You let them bother you, and they win. You understand? But what if they're right? What if people think bad things about you because of me? Then they're fools, and their opinions aren't worth the breath it'd take to argue with them." His expression softened slightly. "You listen to me. You belong at the Double C. You've earned your place there through hard work and decency. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your concern." The words helped, but Lily couldn't quite shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. She'd learned early in life that the opinions of the powerful mattered, whether they should or not, and Sheriff Dalton had the weight of the law behind him. When they arrived back at the ranch, Samuel took one look at Ethan's face and asked no questions. He simply helped unload the wagon and then disappeared into the barn, giving them space. That evening, Lily sat on the porch while the 2 men talked in low voices inside. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the concern in Samuel's tone, the frustration in Ethan's responses. Ghost nickered from his corral, and Lily made her way over to him, grateful for the distraction. The stallion came to the fence immediately now, pushing his head over the top rail so she could stroke his neck. "They're worried," she told him quietly. About me. About what people will say. I don't want to be a burden, Ghost. I don't want to cause them trouble. The horse huffed warm breath against her hand, his dark eyes soft in the fading light. Maybe I should leave. Find somewhere else to go. Even as she said it, her chest tightened with grief. She'd only been here 2 weeks, but already the Double C felt more like home than anywhere she'd been since her parents died. You're not going anywhere. Lily turned to find Ethan standing a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest. I heard what I said in town, and I meant it. You belong here, Lily. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. But the sheriff is a pompous ass who likes throwing his weight around. He doesn't scare me. Ethan moved closer, leaning against the fence beside her. I've dealt with worse than Dale Dalton, believe me. Why doesn't he like you? Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching Ghost graze in the corral. His brother and I served in the same cavalry unit during the Indian campaigns. There was a raid, Comanche, hitting settlements north of here. We rode out to stop them, and it went bad. Real bad. Men died, including Dale's brother Tom. That wasn't your fault. No, but Dale needed someone to blame. I was the ranking officer who survived, so I became the target. He shrugged. Been nearly 15 years, but some grudges don't fade. They just settle in and become part of the landscape. Lily processed this, understanding dawning. So when he saw me with you, he saw a chance to cause you trouble. Maybe. Or maybe he genuinely thinks he's protecting you. Hard to say with Dale. His motives tend to be tangled up with his pride. Ethan reached out and scratched Ghost behind the ears, and the stallion leaned into the touch. Point is, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're safe and cared for. Everything else is just noise. They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching the stars begin to emerge. Lily wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that things would work out, but she'd learned the hard way that the world wasn't always kind to those who needed kindness most. A week later, her fears proved justified when Sheriff Dalton returned to the ranch, this time with 3 men riding behind him. Lily was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the horses, 5 of them, moving at a deliberate pace that suggested purpose rather than casual travel. She straightened, shading her eyes against the midday sun, and felt her stomach drop when she recognized the sheriff's broad-shouldered silhouette. Ethan emerged from the barn, Samuel a step behind him. Both men's hands hung loose at their sides, but Lily had been around them long enough to recognize the tension in their postures. They were ready for trouble. "Sheriff," Ethan said as the riders pulled to a stop in the yard. "What brings you out this way?" Dalton dismounted, his boots raising small clouds of dust. The 3 men with him stayed in their saddles, watching everything with hard eyes. One of them had a rifle resting across his lap, not pointed at anything specific but present nonetheless. "Official business, Cole." Dalton pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "I've got a legal claim here regarding the child you're harboring." The word harboring made Lily's skin crawl. It made her sound like stolen property, something illegal that Ethan was hiding rather than a person he'd saved. "What kind of claim?" Ethan's voice was carefully controlled. "Turns out young Lily here has family back east, an uncle who's been looking for her ever since the wagon train arrived in Oregon without her." Dalton unfolded the paper with exaggerated care. "Man's name is Virgil Grant. He's retained legal counsel and filed for custody. Says the girl belongs with blood kin, not strangers." Lily felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Uncle Virgil. She had vague memories of him from when she was very small, a thin man with cold eyes who'd visited once and made her mother cry after he left. Her father had called him a vulture, circling for any opportunity to profit from other people's misery. "I don't have an uncle," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Not one who cares about me, anyway." "That's not for you to decide, girl." Dalton's tone was almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "Law says family takes precedence. Your uncle has rights." "Rights to what?" Samuel stepped forward, his accent thickening with anger. "To a child he never wanted until now? This smells wrong, Sheriff." "Your opinion on how things smell doesn't change the law, Ortega." Dalton turned his attention back to Ethan. "I'm here to collect the girl and escort her to Dallas, where her uncle's representative will take custody." "Like hell you are." Ethan moved to stand between Dalton and Lily, his body a wall of protection. You show me proper documentation, court orders, proof this man is actually her uncle, proof he has legal standing, and we'll talk. Until then, she stays right here. This is proper documentation, Dalton waved the paper. Signed by a judge in San Antonio, witnessed and notarized. It's all legal and above board. Let me see it. Dalton hesitated, then handed over the document. Ethan read it slowly, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he looked up with eyes that had gone cold as winter stone. This says Virgil Grant is her mother's brother. Lily's mother was an only child. I asked her about her family when I found her. People misremember things, especially children in distress. I don't misremember. Lily's voice cut through the tension like a knife. My mother had no siblings. She told me that many times. Whoever this Virgil Grant is, he's not my uncle. One of the mounted men shifted in his saddle, and Lily caught a glimpse of his face. Hard features, a scar running from his eye to his jaw, and something in his expression that made her want to run. This wasn't a lawman or a concerned relative. This was something else entirely. The document looks official enough, Dalton said, and I've got orders to bring you in, regardless of what you remember or don't remember. So you can come peaceful, or we can do this the hard way. You're not taking her. Ethan's hand moved to his hip, where Lily knew he kept his revolver when he expected trouble. Not without a fight. Don't be stupid, Cole. You're outnumbered and outgunned. We don't want violence, but we will use it if necessary. Samuel had moved to Ethan's left, positioning himself to create a crossfire if shooting started. The three mounted men spread out slightly, hands drifting toward their weapons. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for someone to make the first move. Lily's mind raced. She'd caused this. Her presence had brought violence to the doorstep of men who'd shown her nothing but kindness. If shooting started, people would die, and it would be her fault. Wait. She stepped forward, her crutch tapping against the hard-packed earth. Just wait. Lily, get back inside. Ethan didn't take his eyes off Dalton. No. She moved past him, ignoring his muttered curse. She positioned herself between the two groups, small and fragile but determined. If this is about me, then I should have a say. You're a child, Dalton said. The law doesn't give you a say. Then the law is wrong. She looked up at the sheriff, willing him to see her as more than just a problem to be solved. You said this man is my uncle. You said he has rights. But what about my rights? Don't I get to choose who I live with? Not when you're 8 years old, you don't. I'm almost 9, and I'm smart enough to know when something's wrong. She gestured to the scarred man on horseback. That man isn't a lawman. None of these men are. They're hired guns, and you brought them here to intimidate Mr. Cole into giving me up. Watch your mouth, girl. Why? Because I'm telling the truth? Lily's fear was transforming into anger, hot and bright in her chest. My parents didn't die so I could be handed over to a stranger who claims to be family. They died believing I'd find somewhere safe, somewhere I could be myself without being judged or abandoned. That's very touching, Dalton said, his patience clearly wearing thin. But it doesn't change the facts. You're coming with us one way or another. Then you'll have to drag me. Lily planted her crutch firmly. Because I'm not going willingly. And if you hurt Mr. Cole or Samuel trying to take me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of sheriff you really are. The threat was empty. She had no power, no influence. But the words rang with such conviction that Dalton actually hesitated. He looked at Ethan, then at Lily, then at the scarred man who was watching the exchange with growing impatience. We doing this or not? The scarred man asked. Because I didn't ride all this way to listen to a crippled kid give speeches. The word crippled hung in the air like a slap. Lily felt it sting, but she didn't flinch. She'd been called worse by better people. You'll address her with respect, Samuel said quietly, or I will teach you manners the hard way. The scarred man laughed. You and what army, old man? Just me. I only need me. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Hands moved closer to guns. Horses shifted nervously, sensing the violence gathering in the air like a summer storm. Then, cutting through the moment like a blade, came the sound of wagon wheels and multiple horses approaching fast. Everyone turned to see a covered wagon racing down the road toward the ranch, flanked by 2 riders. As they drew closer, Lily could make out the driver, a a woman in a plain dress and bonnet, and the riders were younger men, maybe in their 20s, both carrying rifles openly. The wagon pulled to a dramatic stop, and the woman set the brake with practiced ease. She was perhaps 60, with iron gray hair and a face that had seen hard years but hadn't surrendered to them. Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, took in the scene with immediate understanding. "Sheriff Dalton," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made men straighten their spines. "What an unpleasant surprise to find you here." "Mrs. Henderson." Dalton's tone had shifted to something approaching nervousness. "This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't it? I heard in town you were planning to remove a child from the Cole Ranch based on dubious legal claims. Thought I'd come see for myself." She climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for her age. "And from the look of things, I arrived just in time." The name Henderson triggered Lily's memory. This was the wagon master's wife, the woman who'd been kind to her in the weeks before the train abandoned her. Mrs. Henderson had argued against leaving Lily behind, had even offered to care for her herself, but her husband had overruled her. "You remember me, child?" Mrs. Henderson asked, moving toward Lily. "Yes, ma'am. You gave me your shawl when the nights got cold. And I've regretted every day since that I didn't fight harder to keep you with us." She turned to face Dalton, her expression hardening. "Now then, Sheriff, let's talk about this supposed uncle." "It's legal business, Martha. You need to stay out of it." "Legal business built on lies is still just lies dressed up fancy." She pulled a folded letter from her pocket. "I received a very interesting communication last week from a colleague of mine in Louisiana. Seems he did some digging into the Grant family at my request." Dalton's face had gone pale. "That's irrelevant. Lily's mother was indeed an only child. No brothers, no uncles on that side of the family. Her father had one brother, but he died in the war." Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through the sheriff's protests like a saw through green wood. "This Virgil Grant is no relation whatsoever. He's a businessman who runs factories in Boston, and he's been recruiting, if you can call it that, orphaned children to work in those factories under conditions that would make your skin crawl." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I have testimony from 3 families who lost children to similar custody claims. Children who disappeared into factories and were never heard from again." She stepped closer to Dalton, fearless despite the armed men around them. "So either you're incompetent and didn't check the validity of these claims, or you're complicit in child trafficking. Which is it, Sheriff?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to hold still, waiting for the answer. Dalton's hand moved toward his gun, a reflexive gesture that made everyone tense. But before he could draw, one of Mrs. Henderson's riders had his rifle up and aimed, the click of the hammer being cocked unnaturally loud. "I wouldn't," the young man said calmly. "Ma's got more friends in this valley than you've got bullets." "Stand down, Jacob," Mrs. Henderson said without looking at her son. "The sheriff is going to do the right thing. Aren't you, Dale?" Dalton's face was a study in conflicting emotions. Anger, fear, humiliation, and something that might have been shame. His hand dropped away from his weapon. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Oh, I think it is. Unless you want me to take what I know to the territorial governor, along with a petition signed by half the families in Cedar Springs." Mrs. Henderson's smile was sharp as a razor. "We've tolerated your corruption because it mostly just hurt your pride, but threatening children, that's a line you don't get to cross." The scarred man spoke up, his voice ugly with frustration. "We had a deal, Dalton. We paid you good money." "Shut up, Graves." "Like hell I will. We came all the way from Boston based on your assurances that you could deliver the merchandise." "I said shut up." Dalton rounded on the man, his composure finally cracking completely. "You want to confess to attempted kidnapping in front of witnesses?" "Be my guest." Graves seemed to realize his mistake. He looked at Mrs. Henderson, at Ethan and Samuel, at the growing number of ranch hands who were emerging from the barn and bunkhouse, drawn by the commotion. His face went from angry to calculating in an instant. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were told the girl was being held against her will. We were trying to help." "With guns and threats? Interesting definition of help." Ethan's voice was cold enough to freeze water. "I think you boys better ride out while you still can. We're not going anywhere without the girl." "Yes, you are." Mrs. Henderson gestured, and more riders appeared at the edge of the property. Neighbors, ranch hands, men who'd clearly been waiting for a signal. They formed a loose circle around Dalton and his companions, not threatening, but definitely present. Because if you don't, these good people are going to escort you to the edge of the county and make sure you keep riding. And Sheriff Dalton is going to let them, because he knows his days wearing that badge are numbered unless he starts making better choices. The math was simple and brutal. Dalton and his 3 men against 30-plus armed ranchers who clearly had no love for the sheriff or his companions. Even Graves could see the situation was untenable. "This isn't over," Graves said, echoing Dalton's earlier threat. "Mr. Grant has resources. He has connections. He'll find another way." "Then I'll fight him another way." Lily surprised herself with her own voice, strong and clear despite the trembling in her legs. "But I'm not leaving here. This is my home now, and you can't take that away from me." Graves stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spurred his horse and rode off without another word, his companions following. They didn't look back. Dalton remained sitting on his horse like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "You've made an enemy today, Martha." "I've had worse enemies than you, Dale Dalton, and I've buried most of them." Mrs. Henderson's voice softened slightly. "You were a good man once, before bitterness ate you up inside. Maybe this is your chance to find that man again before it's too late." The sheriff didn't respond. He simply turned his horse and rode away, his back stiff with wounded pride. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, the tension drained from the yard like water from a broken dam. Men began talking in low voices, checking weapons, laughing with the relief of violence avoided. Ethan moved to Lily's side, his hand settling on her shoulder with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the hardness in his eyes. "You all right?" "I think so." She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving her weak. "I was so scared." "You didn't show it. You stood up like a grown woman twice your size." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'm proud of you." The words made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of her? When was the last time she'd done something worth being proud of? Mrs. Henderson approached, her sons flanking her like bodyguards. Up close, Lily could see the lines of grief etched into the older woman's face, the price of hard decisions and harder losses. "Child, I owe you an apology that's long overdue. You tried to help me, ma'am. My husband made a choice I'll never forgive him for, and he knows it." Mrs. Henderson's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We lost our daughter to fever 5 years back. She was about your age. After that, James couldn't bear to look at sick or hurt children. Said it reminded him too much of what we'd lost. So when your legs started slowing the train, when people started complaining, he convinced himself that leaving you was the merciful thing because you'd find help faster if you weren't moving. That's not your fault, isn't it? I let him make that choice without fighting harder. I let him prioritize speed over decency." She reached out and cupped Lily's face with a weathered hand. "But I've been making inquiries since we reached Oregon, trying to find out what happened to you. When I heard you were here, safe and cared for, I thanked heaven. And when I heard about Dalton's plan, I knew I had to come." "Thank you." Lily leaned into the touch, starving for the maternal affection she'd lost when her own mother died. "Thank you for coming back." "I should have never left in the first place." Mrs. Henderson looked at Ethan. "You're a good man, Cole. Better than most. This child is lucky to have found you." "I'm the lucky one," Ethan said quietly. They talked for another hour, Mrs. Henderson providing more details about Virgil Grant's operation. He'd been buying fraudulent custody claims from corrupt officials, using them to acquire children who could be put to work in his factories. The conditions were brutal: long hours, dangerous machinery, minimal food and shelter. Some children died. Others simply disappeared when they became too sick or injured to work. "He's done this at least a dozen times that I can prove," Mrs. Henderson said, accepting a cup of coffee from Samuel. "Probably more that haven't been documented. The children he takes are always orphans or from families too poor to fight back legally. He's careful to stay just inside the law, or at least make it look that way." "Will he try again?" Samuel asked. "Maybe, probably. Men like him don't give up easy when there's profit involved. She set down her cup. "But he'll have a harder time now. I'm writing to every newspaper between here and Boston, and I'm contacting a lawyer in Dallas who specializes in fighting this kind of corruption. We'll make enough noise that Grant will think twice before trying this again." "And Dalton?" Ethan's voice was tight. "Will either resign or be removed. I've already started the petition to have him replaced. Too many people in this valley have had enough of his petty tyrannies and convenient blindness to real crime." Mrs. Henderson stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "But that's for me to handle. You just keep this girl safe and let her be the child she deserves to be." After Mrs. Henderson and her sons departed, the ranch settled back into its normal rhythms. But something had changed. The neighbors who'd shown up to help lingered, curious about Lily, asking questions about the confrontation. What if he comes back? What if next time Mrs. Henderson isn't here to stop him? Then we'll stop him ourselves. Ethan moved to sit beside her on the porch steps. "Lily, I want you to understand something. What happened today? That wasn't just about keeping you safe from a bad situation. That was about fighting for what's right, for your right to choose your own future. I'm 8 years old. I don't have rights. You have the ones we give you, the ones we're willing to fight for." He took a sip of coffee, his eyes distant. "When my daughter died, I thought my life was over. When Sarah died 2 years later, I was certain of it. I went through the motions, working the ranch, eating, sleeping, but I wasn't really living, just existing." Lily waited, sensing he needed to tell this story. "Then I found you on that road, and something shifted. Suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just obligation or habit. I had someone depending on me, someone who needed me to be better than I'd been." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "You gave me a purpose again, Lily. So when I say I'll fight for you, I mean it with everything I am. What if I'm not worth fighting for?" "Don't ever say that. Don't ever think it." His voice was fierce. "You're worth every bit of trouble you've caused, and more. You're smart. You're brave. You've got a gift with animals that borders on magical, and you've survived things that would break most adults. Any man who can't see your worth is a fool." Lily felt tears burning in her eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd cried on that dusty roadside weeks ago. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of finally being seen as something other than a burden. "I don't want to leave here," she whispered. "Ever." "Then you won't. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. And anyone who tries to take you away will have to go through me, Samuel, and apparently half the county." He smiled, some of the tension leaving his face. "We're stubborn people out here, Lily. We don't let go of what's ours easily." That night, Lily lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about the day's events. The fear, the confrontation, the moment when violence had seemed inevitable, but also the unexpected arrival of Mrs. Henderson, the support of neighbors who barely knew her, the fierce protectiveness of Ethan and Samuel. She thought about Virgil Grant somewhere in Boston, probably already planning his next move. Thought about Sheriff Dalton, nursing his wounded pride and wondering if his career was over. Thought about all the other children who hadn't been lucky enough to be found by someone like Ethan, who'd disappeared into factories and been forgotten. And she made herself a promise. If she survived this, if she made it through whatever came next, she would find a way to help those children. She would be a voice for the voiceless, just as Mrs. Henderson had been a voice for her. But first, she had to stay alive, had to stay free, had to prove that a girl with a twisted leg and no family could build a life worth living. Outside her window, the Texas night spread vast and dark, full of possibilities both wonderful and terrible. Somewhere in that darkness, threats lurked. But somewhere, too, was the promise of morning, of new chances, of a future she could shape with her own hands. Lily closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow, whatever it brought, she wouldn't face it alone. The answer came 3 weeks later, not with guns or threats, but with something far more dangerous. A man in a black suit carrying a leather satchel and the weight of the law behind him. Lily was working with Ghost in the corral when the buggy arrived, teaching the stallion to accept a saddle blanket without panicking. It was slow work, requiring patience and trust that had taken weeks to build, and she was so focused on the horse's subtle reactions that she didn't notice the visitor until Samuel called her name. "Lily, come here, please. We have company." The The tone in his voice made her stomach knot. She draped the blanket over the fence and made her way across the yard, Ghost following her to the rail and watching with worried eyes. The man who'd arrived was perhaps 50, with silver hair and a face that had probably never smiled without calculation behind it. His suit was expensive, his shoes polished to a mirror shine despite the dusty roads. Everything about him screamed money and power and the kind of confidence that came from rarely being told no. "Miss Grant," he said, offering a slight bow that was more mockery than respect. "My name is Howard Blackwood. I'm an attorney representing your uncle, Virgil Grant." "He's not my uncle." Lily's voice came out steadier than she felt. "That's a matter of some dispute, which is precisely why I'm here." Blackwood opened his satchel and withdrew a thick folder. "I have documentation proving Mr. Grant's familial relationship, along with a court order from a federal judge granting him legal custody." Ethan emerged from the house, his face dark with anger. "We already went through this with the sheriff. Those claims are fraudulent. Sheriff Dalton was operating on incomplete information and has since been removed from his position for misconduct unrelated to this case." Blackwood's smile was thin and cold. "I, however, have been retained by Mr. Grant specifically to ensure all legal procedures are followed correctly. Everything I have here is legitimate, verified, and legally binding." He handed the folder to Ethan, who scanned the contents with growing tension. Samuel read over his shoulder, his expression mirroring Ethan's concern. "This is signed by Judge Marcus Whitmore," Ethan said slowly. "Federal Circuit Court in San Antonio." "Indeed. Judge Whitmore is known for his strict interpretation of family law. He reviewed all the evidence and determined that blood relations take precedence over informal guardianship arrangements." Blackwood's tone was infuriatingly reasonable. "I understand you've grown attached to the child, Mr. Cole, but the law is quite clear on this matter." "The law was clear when Dalton came to, and that was built on lies. Which is why Mr. Grant went through proper channels this time. The genealogical evidence has been verified by 3 independent researchers. Birth certificates, marriage records, census data, all of it confirms that Virgil Grant is the younger brother of Lily's maternal grandmother, making him her great-uncle and her closest living relative." Lily felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Could it be true? Had she been wrong about having no family? Her mother had rarely talked about her own parents, and Lily had been too young to press for details. "Even if he is related," Samuel said carefully, "that does not make him fit to care for her. Mr. Grant is a successful businessman, unmarried, with considerable resources and a strong desire to provide for his great-niece. He maintains a residence in Boston and has already arranged for Lily to attend a prestigious school for girls." Blackwood pulled out another document. "He's also prepared to compensate Mr. Cole for any expenses incurred during Lily's stay here. I don't want his money. Nevertheless, the law requires that custody be transferred. I have a court order to that effect." Blackwood's eyes shifted to Lily. "I'll be escorting Miss Grant to Dallas tomorrow, where Mr. Grant's personal representative will take custody and arrange transportation to Boston." "No." Lily stepped forward, her crutch digging into the dirt. "I'm not going." "I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter, child." "Stop calling me child like I'm too stupid to understand what's happening. You're trying to take me away from my home and give me to a stranger who doesn't care about me just so he can use me in his factories." Blackwood's expression flickered, just for an instant, with something that might have been surprise. Then the professional mask returned. "I don't know what wild stories you've been told, but Mr. Grant operates several textile manufacturing facilities. Yes, they employ adults under fair conditions with reasonable wages. He has no intention of putting you to work." "Then why does he want me?" Lily's voice rose. "Why would a rich businessman suddenly care about a great niece he's never met? Why go through all this trouble and expense?" "Because family matters, even when circumstances have separated you for years. Mr. Grant deeply regrets that he lost contact with your mother after she married. He wants to make amends by providing for you." The explanation was smooth, practiced, and completely hollow. Lily could hear the lie in it, could see it in the way Blackwood's eyes didn't quite meet hers when he spoke. "I don't believe you." "Your belief is irrelevant. The court order stands." Blackwood returned his attention to Ethan. "I can have the marshal here by evening if you choose to resist. I'd prefer to handle this civilly, but I will use whatever legal means necessary to enforce Judge Whitmore's ruling. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Lily could see him calculating odds, considering options, running through scenarios that all ended badly. If he fought this with force, he'd be arrested. If he fought it legally, he'd need time and money he didn't have. Either way, the law was against him. How long do we have? Ethan's voice was rough with barely controlled emotion. I'll return tomorrow at noon, have the girl ready to travel. Blackwood gathered his papers. I understand this is difficult, Mr. Cole, but you've done a good thing here. You saved this child's life. Now it's time to let her family provide for her properly. He climbed into his buggy and drove away, leaving behind a silence heavy with despair. Lily stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. After everything, after the confrontation with Dalton, after Mrs. Henderson's intervention, after finally feeling safe, it was happening anyway. She was being taken away, handed over to a man who saw her as property rather than a person. No. The word escaped as barely a whisper, then louder. No, no, I won't go, I won't. Ethan moved to her side, pulling her into an embrace that felt like the only solid thing in a world gone liquid and unstable. We'll figure something out. I promise. How? He has a court order. He has the law. Then we find a better law, a better judge, something. But even as he said it, Lily could hear the doubt in his voice. Samuel had been standing silent, studying the documents Blackwood left behind. Now he looked up, his face grave. These are legitimate. The seals, the signatures, the legal language, all of it is proper. This Judge Whitmore, he is known to be honest but rigid. If he signed this, he believed the evidence was sound. Then the evidence was faked well enough to fool him. Ethan released Lily and began pacing, his mind clearly racing. Mrs. Henderson proved the first claims were false. We just need to prove these are too. In less than 24 hours? Hefe, I do not see how. There has to be a way. But as the afternoon wore into evening, no way presented itself. Ethan sent riders to fetch Mrs. Henderson and to inquire about lawyers in the area who might help. Mrs. Henderson arrived within 2 hours, her face set with determination. But even she looked troubled after reviewing the documents. This is more sophisticated than Dalton's attempt, she admitted, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread before her. The genealogical evidence appears thorough. Birth records from Louisiana parishes, marriage certificates, even census data that seems to support the claim. Seems to support or actually supports, Ethan pressed. I can't tell without going to Louisiana myself and verifying the original documents. That would take weeks. She looked at Lily with compassion. I'm sorry, child. I don't know how to fight this in the time we have. Lily sat in the corner, ghost leather lead rope twisted between her fingers. She'd brought it in from the barn, needing something tangible to hold on to while her world collapsed around her. The stallion had called after her when she left, a sound of distress that mirrored her own feelings perfectly. What about the judge? Samuel suggested. Could we appeal to him directly, explain the situation? Judge Whitmore is in San Antonio. Even if we left now, we couldn't reach him before Blackwood returns tomorrow. Mrs. Henderson drummed her fingers on the table. And federal judges don't typically appreciate civilians showing up to argue cases already decided. So we're supposed to just hand her over, let her be taken to Boston to work in factories until she breaks? Ethan's voice cracked with frustration. The factories aren't proven. That's rumor and suspicion, not evidence. It's true, though. We all know it's true. They argued for hours, cycling through increasingly desperate plans. Hide Lily and claim she ran away. Take her to Mexico where the court order wouldn't reach. Find the real family members and prove Grant was lying. But every idea foundered on the same problems: time, resources, and the cold reality of the law. Lily listened to it all with growing numbness. These people cared about her, truly cared, and it wasn't enough. Love couldn't beat court orders. Kindness couldn't defeat men with money and power. She'd been a fool to think otherwise. Sometime near midnight, exhaustion claimed the adults. Mrs. Henderson dozed in a chair, Samuel disappeared to the barn, and Ethan sat on the porch staring into the darkness like he might find answers written in the stars. Lily made her way outside, settling beside him on the steps. For a long time, neither spoke. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally. "I promised to keep you safe, and I'm failing." "You tried. That's more than most people would do. Trying isn't enough. It's all we have sometimes." Lily leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "My papa used to say that life isn't fair, but people can be. You've been fair to me, Ethan. More than fair. You've been family when I had none. You'll always be family, no matter what happens tomorrow." "Will I? Or will I just be a memory of something that didn't work out?" She wasn't being cruel, just honest. "You'll move on eventually, find someone else to care about. And I'll be in Boston working machines until my hands bleed, trying to remember what it felt like to be wanted." "Don't talk like that." "Why not? It's true." Lily straightened, looking at him in the moonlight. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll take care of Ghost. Don't let anyone else have him or try to break him with whips and spurs. He deserves better than that." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're going to take care of Ghost yourself because you're not leaving." "Ethan, no. I didn't pull you off that roadside just to watch you be dragged away to hell. There has to be an answer, and we're going to find it." But morning came without revelation. Lily woke in her bed, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back with crushing weight. This was her last day at the Double C Ranch. Her last morning waking to the smell of Samuel's coffee and the sound of chickens in the yard. Her last chance to see Ghost, to feel the Texas sun on her face, to be in a place where she belonged. She dressed slowly, pulling on one of the dresses made from fabric Ethan had bought in town. The stitching was uneven, Samuel's work, done late at night by lamplight, but it fit her perfectly and had been made with love. Everything here had been made with love, and she was about to lose all of it. At breakfast, no one pretended to eat. They sat around the table like mourners at a wake, waiting for the inevitable. The sound of hooves came just before noon, exactly as promised. Blackwood's buggy rolled into the yard, and this time he wasn't alone. A marshal sat beside him, badge glinting in the sun, rifle resting across his lap. This wasn't a negotiation. This was enforcement. Lily stood, her crutch feeling heavier than usual. She'd packed nothing because she owned nothing worth taking. Everything that mattered, the people, the animals, the sense of belonging, would stay here while she was carried away. Ethan met Blackwood at the door, his face carved from stone. "You're early." "I prefer punctuality," Blackwood gestured to the marshal. "This is Marshal Davies. He's here to ensure the transfer proceeds smoothly." "Meaning he'll shoot us if we resist." "Meaning he'll enforce a legal court order if necessary. I hope it won't be." Blackwood's eyes found Lily. "Are you ready, Miss Grant?" "No, but I don't suppose that matters." "I'm afraid not." Lily moved toward the door, each step feeling like a small death. Samuel stood with his hat in his hands, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. Mrs. Henderson had returned at dawn and now waited outside, her face a mask of fury and helplessness. But it was Ethan who stopped her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Wait. Just wait one more minute. Mr. Cole, we have a schedule to keep," Blackwood protested. "1 minute won't break your schedule." Ethan turned to the marshal. "You're here to enforce the law, right? To make sure everything's done properly?" "That's correct." "Then I'm invoking my right to contest custody on the grounds of fraud and child endangerment." Ethan's voice was steady, but Lily could see the desperation in his eyes. "I'm formally challenging Judge Whitmore's ruling and requesting an emergency hearing." Blackwood's expression soured. "You can't just—" "Actually, he can." A new voice cut through the tension, and everyone turned to see a man dismounting from a horse at the edge of the property. He was younger than Blackwood, maybe 35, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a leather document case under his arm. Texas law allows for custody challenges based on credible evidence of fraud or danger to the child. "And who the hell are you?" Blackwood demanded. "Daniel Warren, attorney at law, recently retained by Mrs. Martha Henderson on behalf of Mr. Ethan Cole." He moved forward with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power he held. "I've spent the last 3 weeks investigating Virgil Grant's business operations, and I have evidence that proves this custody claim is part of a systematic pattern of child trafficking for labor purposes." Blackwood went very still. "That's a serious accusation." It's a well-documented fact. I have testimony from 17 former child laborers who were acquired through similar legal maneuvers. I have medical records showing injuries consistent with factory work. I have financial documents proving Grant profits directly from child labor. Warren opened his case and began laying papers on the porch railing. I also have evidence that the genealogical documents you presented to Judge Whitmore contain deliberate falsifications in the parish records. That's impossible. Those records were verified by researchers hired and paid by Virgil Grant. When I sent my own researchers to Louisiana, they found significant discrepancies. Warren pulled out a specific document. This birth certificate, for instance, claims to show Virgil Grant as the son of Lily's great-grandparents, but the parish register shows no such birth. The certificate is a forgery inserted into records after the fact. The marshal had straightened, his attention now fully on Warren. You're saying this custody claim is fraudulent? I'm saying it's built on fabricated evidence presented to a judge who had no reason to suspect deception. Once Judge Whitmore sees what I've compiled, he'll rescind the order immediately. Warren's smile was sharp. Of course, that assumes Mr. Blackwood wants to wait for the judge's review. He could also voluntarily withdraw the custody claim right now and save everyone considerable embarrassment. Blackwood's face had gone from confident to calculating. Lily watched him weighing options, considering risks, trying to find an angle that would let him salvage the situation. These allegations are unsubstantiated. I have 17 witnesses ready to testify. I have doctors willing to examine Lily and confirm she shows none of the malnutrition or injuries consistent with Grant's other acquisitions. I have a federal prosecutor in Boston who's very interested in these documents. Warren stepped closer, lowering his voice. Walk away now, Blackwood. Tell Grant this one got away. Because if you push this, I will bury you both in legal proceedings that will destroy what's left of your reputations. The silence stretched like pulled wire. Blackwood looked at the marshal, at the documents, at Lily standing between Ethan and Samuel like she belonged there. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, it is. Warren's voice was iron. Grant can try again with some other child, and I'll fight him again. But Lily Grant stays here, with the people who actually care about her welfare instead of her labor value. Blackwood gathered his papers with shaking hands. The judge will hear about this. I'm counting on it. I've already filed a formal complaint with the Federal Circuit Court detailing Grant's pattern of fraud. Judge Whitmore will be very interested to learn how his court was used to facilitate child trafficking. The lawyer climbed into his buggy and drove away without another word, his departure lacking the smug confidence of his arrival. The marshal remained behind, studying Warren with professional interest. You really have all that evidence? Every word of it, documented and verified. Would you like copies for your own investigation? I would. The marshal dismounted, accepting the folder Warren offered. Grant's operation has been on our radar for a while, but we've never had enough to move on it. This might be exactly what we need. As the marshal rode away with his evidence, a wave of relief so powerful it was almost painful washed over Lily. She swayed and Ethan caught her, holding her steady while her legs remembered how to function. Is it really over? She whispered. It's really over, Warren confirmed. Grant might try other legal avenues, but he'll find them all blocked. And once word spreads about what I've uncovered, his entire operation will collapse under investigation. Mrs. Henderson moved forward, embracing Warren with obvious affection. Daniel, you brilliant man. Where did you find all that evidence so quickly? I didn't. I've been building this case for 6 months, ever since my own niece nearly fell into Grant's trap back in Illinois. When you contacted me about Lily's situation, I realized this was the opportunity I needed to expose him completely. Warren looked at Lily, his expression softening. 16 other children are being freed because of what happened here today. You helped save them all. The weight of it hit Lily all at once. Not just her own rescue, but the rescue of others like her. Children who would have disappeared into factories, been broken and discarded, forgotten by a world that saw them as disposable. And now they had a chance because people had fought for them, because she had fought for herself. I don't understand, she said, her voice thick with tears. Why did you help me? You don't even know me. Because someone helped my niece when she needed it. Because children deserve to be protected, not exploited. Because it was the right thing to do. Warren smiled. Same reason Ethan pulled you off that roadside. Same reason Samuel built you a crutch. Same reason Mrs. Henderson risked confronting a corrupt sheriff. Good people do good things, Lily. It's really that simple. That evening, after Warren and Mrs. Henderson had departed and the ranch had settled back into its normal rhythms, Lily found herself in Ghost Corral with her arms around the stallion's neck, breathing in his familiar scent of hay and leather and wild things slowly learning to trust. We're staying, she told him, her voice muffled against his coat. Both of us. This is home now, really home. The horse nickered softly, lowering his head so she could scratch behind his ears the way he liked. In the months since she'd arrived, they'd both transformed. She from a broken girl on a roadside to someone strong enough to stand up for herself. He from a traumatized animal to something approaching domesticated. Neither of them was healed completely. Perhaps they never would be. But they were healing together, and that was enough. Ethan appeared at the corral fence, watching them with an expression Lily had learned to recognize. Pride mixed with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this was real. Tomorrow we're going to town, he said. Going to file proper guardianship papers. Make this legal and permanent. No more questions, no more challenges. You'll be officially mine to raise until you're old enough to make your own choices. Yours? If you want, if you'll have a stubborn old rancher as a father. His voice was uncertain, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely heard. Lily left Ghost and made her way to the fence, looking up at this man who'd saved her life and then kept saving it in 100 small ways every day since. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. Ethan reached through the rails and pulled her into an embrace, his arms strong and sure around her small frame. And for the first time since her parents died, Lily let herself believe in permanence. Let herself trust that this wasn't temporary, wasn't conditional, wasn't something that would be snatched away the moment she got comfortable. This was real. This was family. This was home. And no one was ever taking it away from her again. The guardianship papers were filed the following week in a courthouse in San Antonio, with Daniel Warren presenting the case to Judge Whitmore himself. Lily sat between Ethan and Samuel in the gallery, her hands folded in her lap, while Warren methodically dismantled every claim Virgil Grant had made. The genealogical evidence was exposed as fabrication, the custody order rescinded, and a federal investigation into Grant's operations officially opened. Judge Whitmore, a stern man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many lies presented as truth, listened to everything with growing displeasure. When Warren finished, the judge removed his spectacles and addressed the courtroom with barely contained anger. I have served on this bench for 23 years, and in that time I have prided myself on careful deliberation and thorough examination of evidence. To learn that my court was used as an instrument of child trafficking is both humiliating and infuriating. He turned his gaze to Lily, and his expression softened. Young lady, I apologize that the system meant to protect you nearly failed you so catastrophically. I am issuing a permanent guardianship order granting Ethan Cole full parental rights and responsibilities. Furthermore, I am placing a federal protection order preventing Virgil Grant or any of his associates from approaching you or attempting further custody claims. The gavel came down with finality, and Lily felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tight. It was truly over. No more looking over her shoulder, no more wondering when the next legal threat would arrive. She was Ethan's daughter in the eyes of the law, and nothing could change that. Outside the courthouse, Warren shook Ethan's hand with genuine warmth. Take care of her, Cole. She's something special. I know. And thank you, Daniel, for everything. Thank Mrs. Henderson. She's the one who tracked me down and convinced me this case was worth taking. Warren glanced at Lily. Though after meeting you, I'd have taken it anyway. You've got courage, young lady. Don't ever lose that. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was the peaceful quiet of resolution rather than the anxious silence of waiting for disaster. Samuel dozed against the wagon side, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Ethan drove with one hand, the other resting on Lily's shoulder in a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. What happens to those other children? Lily asked as they crossed into familiar territory. The Double C's boundaries marked by fence posts Ethan had set himself years ago. The ones Mr. Warren mentioned who were in the factories? They're being removed and placed with families or in orphanages that have been vetted. It'll take time, and some of them are in rough shape, but they'll have a chance now. Ethan's voice was heavy with the knowledge of what those children had endured. Warren's coordinating with federal marshals across 3 states. Grant's entire operation is collapsing. Good. Lily felt a fierce satisfaction at the thought. He deserves worse than that. He'll get it. Men like him make enemies on all sides. Once the protection of money and influence is gone, those enemies tend to come collecting. Ethan glanced at her. But that's not your concern anymore. Your concern is deciding what you want to study first. Samuel's been pestering me about teaching you Spanish, and I figured it was time you learned proper reading and arithmetic beyond what your parents taught you. The casual mention of a future, of plans and education and time stretching out before her made Lily's throat tight. She'd spent so long just trying to survive one day to the next that the concept of planning for months or years ahead felt almost foreign. I'd like that. Learning, all of it. Then that's what we'll do. The ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western hills, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Lily could see Ghost in his corral, head up and watching for her return. The stallion had become almost obsessive about her comings and goings, calling anxiously whenever she left and settling only when she returned. As soon as the wagon stopped, she climbed down and made her way to him, her crutch steady against the packed earth. Ghost pushed his nose against her chest, breathing deeply as if confirming she was real and whole. "I'm back," she murmured, running her hands along his neck. "And I'm not leaving again. Not for court. Not for anything. This is home." Over the following months, life on the Double C settled into rhythms that felt permanent rather than temporary. Lily's days filled with work and learning in equal measure. Samuel taught her Spanish in the evenings, his patience infinite as she struggled with pronunciation. Ethan taught her mathematics using the ranch's books, showing her how to track expenses and calculate profit margins on cattle sales. Mrs. Henderson visited weekly, bringing books borrowed from families across the valley and staying to teach Lily geography and history. But it was with the animals that Lily's true gift became undeniable. Word spread about the girl who'd tamed Ghost, and neighbors began bringing their problem horses, animals too wild or too traumatized to work. Lily would spend hours with each one, talking softly, moving slowly, building trust one careful interaction at a time. More often than not, the horses responded to her in ways they wouldn't for anyone else. "You've got a calling," Ethan told her one afternoon, watching her work with a mare that had been beaten until she'd attack anyone who came near. "People are going to start paying for this kind of work. I don't want payment. I just want to help them. Help them and get paid. No shame in that. You're providing a valuable service." He leaned against the corral fence, his expression thoughtful. "Been thinking about expanding the ranch's operation. We could take in more horses, train them properly, sell them to people who need good working animals. You could be part of that." The idea took root in Lily's mind like a seed finding fertile soil, a purpose beyond just existing, beyond just being the girl who'd been saved. She could be the girl who saved others. Horses, certainly, but maybe more than that. "I want to help children too," she said suddenly, "like those ones Mr. Warren rescued, the ones with nowhere to go." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That's a big undertaking, Lily, bigger than horses." "I know, but I keep thinking about them, about being hungry and scared and alone, about how different things would be if you hadn't stopped that day." She turned to face him fully. "What if we could be that for other kids? Not all of them, but maybe a few. The ones who need space and work, and people who understand that being different or broken doesn't make you worthless." She could see him considering it, weighing the practical realities against the moral imperative. The ranch barely turned profit most years, and taking in children would stretch their resources even thinner. But she could also see something else in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, of his own daughter in Lily's words, of all the ways Emma's death had left a void that no amount of work or whiskey could fill. "Let me talk to Samuel," he said finally, "and we'll need to make sure we're doing it right, legal and proper. But if we can make it work, then yes, we'll make space for them." The first child arrived 6 months later, brought by Daniel Warren himself. His name was Thomas, a boy of 10 with burn scars covering his arms from a factory accident. He'd been working 12-hour days in a textile mill before Warren's investigation freed him, and now he stood in the ranch yard, looking like he expected the ground to open up and swallow him whole. Lily recognized that look. She'd worn it herself, standing in this same yard, wondering if this was real or just another cruel trick. "Hi," she said, moving toward him slowly so as not to startle him. "I'm Lily. That's my father Ethan, and that's Samuel, and that big gray horse watching you is Ghost." Thomas's eyes flicked to the stallion, then back to her. "Why is he called Ghost?" "Because when Mr. Cole first got him, he was so traumatized he barely seemed real, like a ghost of what a horse should be." She smiled. "But he got better. We both did, and you will too." "I don't think so." Thomas's voice was flat, dead in a way that no child's voice should be. "I'm broken. The foreman at the mill said so, said I was worthless now that my hands don't work right." Lily held up her crutch. "I was born with a twisted leg. The wagon train that was supposed to take me to Oregon left me on the roadside to die because they said I was slowing them down. But Mr. Cole found me, and he didn't care about my leg. He cared about me. That's different." "Why? Because your scars came from cruelty instead of birth?" She shook her head. "Pain is pain, Thomas. And being told you're worthless is a lie, no matter who says it. You're here because you matter, because we have room, and we have work, and we don't care if you're perfect. We just care that you try." Over the following weeks, Thomas began to thaw. Samuel put him to work in the garden, where his scarred hands could still pull weeds and plant seeds. Ethan taught him to care for the chickens and collect eggs, work that required patience rather than strength. And Lily brought him to Ghost's corral, showing him how animals didn't care about scars or disabilities, only about kindness and consistency. "He's letting me touch him," Thomas breathed one afternoon, his hand resting on Ghost's neck while the stallion stood perfectly still. "He's really letting me." "He knows you understand," Lily said, "about being hurt, about learning to trust again. Animals can sense that." Thomas looked at her with eyes that were beginning to show something other than despair. "Do you think I could learn to work with horses like you do?" "I think you can learn to do anything you set your mind to. It just takes time and practice and people who believe in you." The second child came 3 months after Thomas, a girl named Sarah who'd been orphaned when cholera swept through her family's homestead. She was 12, old enough to remember everything she'd lost, and she arrived angry at the world and everyone in it. "I don't need charity," she announced on her first day, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed and her chin lifted in defiance. "I can take care of myself." "Good," Ethan said mildly, "because we're not offering charity. We're offering work and a place to sleep and food to eat. You pull your weight, you stay. You don't, and you're free to leave whenever you want." Sarah blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "You mean it? I can just leave?" "Door's right there. No one's keeping you prisoner. But if you stay, you work. Same as everyone else." It was exactly the right approach. Sarah had been treated as helpless and pitiful for so long that being offered dignity through labor was revolutionary. She threw herself into every task with fierce determination, as if trying to prove she was worth keeping. Lily watched Sarah carefully, recognizing the desperate need to be useful that came from being told you were a burden. She'd felt it herself, that crushing fear that kindness would evaporate the moment you stopped earning it. "You don't have to work yourself to death," Lily told her one evening, finding Sarah still scrubbing dishes long after everyone else had gone to bed. "You're allowed to rest. If I rest, I'm not useful. And if I'm not useful, why would you keep me?" "Because you're a person, not a tool. You have worth beyond what you can produce." Lily sat down at the table, her crutch leaning against her chair. "I used to think the same way. Thought if I didn't prove my value every single day, Mr. Cole would realize I was too much trouble and send me away. But you know what he told me?" "What?" "That family isn't about being useful. It's about belonging, about having a place where you matter, even on days when you can't do anything productive." Lily smiled. "Some days my leg hurts so bad I can barely walk. Those days I don't work much, and Mr. Cole doesn't love me any less for it." Sarah's defenses cracked slightly. "He really lets you just rest when you need to?" He insists on it, says pushing through pain just makes it worse in the long run. Lily reached out and touched Sarah's work-roughened hands. You're safe here. You don't have to earn your keep every second of every day. You're allowed to just be. The words seemed to unlock something in Sarah. She started sleeping later in the mornings, sitting on the porch in the evenings instead of finding more work to do, even laughing occasionally at Samuel's terrible jokes. And slowly, the anger that had armored her began to soften into something more like healing. By the end of the first year, the ranch had 6 children living in what had been the old bunkhouse, converted into dormitory-style sleeping quarters. 3 boys, 3 girls, ranging in age from 8 to 14. All of them had been damaged by the world in different ways, orphaned, abandoned, exploited, abused. All of them found on the Double C Ranch something they'd lost or never had to begin with. They worked during the day, tending animals, maintaining fences, helping with harvests, and studied in the evenings. Mrs. Henderson coordinated with teachers from 3 counties to provide lessons, and the ranch's reputation began to shift from struggling cattle operation to something approaching a miracle. People are talking, Samuel mentioned one evening, sitting on the porch with Ethan while the children finished their chores. Saying good things, mostly, about what we're doing here. And the bad things? Ethan asked, because there were always bad things when you tried to do something different. Some say we're running a workhouse, exploiting children for free labor. Others say we're too soft, that charity without discipline breeds laziness. Samuel shrugged. But mostly, people see what's really happening. That you've taken children no one else wanted and given them purpose. Lily did that. I just provided the space. You provided more than space, Jefe. You provided the example of a good man doing good things. The children, they see that. They learn from it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily work with Thomas and a young mare in the corral. The boy's scarred hands were gentle on the horse's neck, and his face showed concentration rather than the blank despair he'd arrived with. You ever think about how different things would be if I'd just ridden past her that day? Ethan said softly. If I'd been in a hurry, or too wrapped up in my own grief to notice one small girl under a tree? Every day. But you did not ride past. You stopped. And because you stopped, 6 children have homes who would not otherwise. 17 more are free from factories, and one old vaquero has found purpose in his declining years. Samuel smiled. One choice, Jefe. That is all it takes sometimes. One choice to do the right thing, and the world changes. The second year brought challenges that tested everyone's resolve. A harsh winter killed half their cattle and damaged the barn, straining resources already stretched thin. 2 of the children ran away, convinced they'd be better off on their own, though both returned within a week, cold and hungry and grateful to be taken back without judgment. And a circuit preacher arrived, full of fire and judgment, declaring that an unmarried man raising children, especially girls, was an affront to decency and divine order. Ethan faced the preacher in the ranch yard while the children watched from windows, fear and uncertainty written on their faces. These children need a proper Christian home, the preacher declared, his voice booming with self-righteous certainty. A home with a mother's gentle hand and a father's firm guidance within the bonds of holy matrimony. What you're doing here is unnatural. What's unnatural is leaving children to starve or be exploited because they don't fit into neat little boxes. Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. Every child here came from somewhere else first. Families that couldn't or wouldn't keep them. Institutions that treated them like problems to be managed. I'm giving them work, education, and dignity. What exactly about that offends you? The appearance of impropriety is worth less than the reality of their welfare. These children are fed, clothed, educated, and protected. They learn trades that will serve them well in life. They're taught to read and write and think for themselves. If that's offensive to you, then I'd say your priorities need examining, not mine. The preacher's face reddened. You cannot simply ignore the laws of man and heaven. I'm not ignoring anything. I've got legal guardianship over every child here, properly filed and documented. I've got teachers coming regularly to ensure they're educated. And as for heaven's laws, I figure treating orphans with kindness and giving them a chance at life is probably more in line with what heaven wants than letting them suffer in the name of propriety. You are a prideful man, Mr. Cole. Pride comes before a fall. Maybe. But standing by while children suffer out of fear of what people might think, that's not humility. That's cowardice. And I'd rather fall proud than stand safe while kids go hungry. The preacher left in a fury, but his visit had consequences. Some families in the valley withdrew their support, uncomfortable with the questions he'd raised. Donations of food and supplies dwindled. The few paying clients who'd hired Lily to work with their horses stopped coming, not wanting to be associated with the ranch's growing controversy. It was Sarah who brought it up at dinner one evening, her voice tight with worry. Are we going to have to leave? Because people are talking? Ethan set down his fork and looked around the table at 6 anxious faces. No, you're not leaving. This is your home, and a few gossips and a self-righteous preacher don't change that. But what if we can't afford to keep everyone, Hook? Thomas asked. What if there's not enough food? Then we'll figure it out. We'll plant more vegetables, hunt more game, find more ways to make money. What we won't do is send any of you away because it's become inconvenient or uncomfortable to keep you. Why not? The question came from Michael, the youngest boy, only 8 years old and still learning that promises could be kept. Everyone else did. Ethan's expression softened. Because you're family. And family doesn't give up on each other just because times get hard. Your being here makes my life harder in a lot of ways. More mouths to feed, more worries to carry, more work to do. But it also makes my life better. Makes it mean something, you understand? Michael nodded slowly, not entirely convinced, but wanting to believe. That night, Lily found Ethan in the barn, checking on a cow that was due to calve. He looked exhausted, the weight of responsibility aging him beyond his years. We're going to be okay, aren't we? She asked, settling onto a hay bale near where he worked. Honestly, I don't know. Money's tight, tighter than it's ever been. And if that preacher keeps stirring up trouble, it could get worse. He straightened, rubbing the small of his back. But we've survived worse. We'll survive this too. What if we can't? Then we make choices. Hard ones, maybe. But those choices won't involve sending you kids away. I promised you a home, Lily. I promised all of them, and I keep my promises. The solution came from an unexpected source. Daniel Warren arrived 2 weeks later with a proposal that would change everything. I've been working with a philanthropist in Boston, a man named Edmund Shaw, who made his fortune in railroads and has been looking for worthy causes to support. I told him about what you're doing here, and he's interested in funding an expansion. Ethan looked skeptical. Why would a rich man in Boston care about a struggling ranch in Texas? Because his own childhood was spent in an orphanage that treated children like livestock. He's never forgotten what that felt like. When he heard about a place where orphans are treated like family, where they learn trades and receive education and are given dignity, it resonated with him. Warren pulled out papers. He's proposing a significant endowment to support up to 20 children with funds for education, medical care, and proper facilities. In exchange, he wants regular reports on the children's progress and the ranch's operations. What's the catch? The catch is you have to accept oversight. Shaw's Foundation will send inspectors quarterly to ensure the children are being properly cared for and that funds are being used appropriately. You'll lose some autonomy. Ethan studied the papers, his jaw tight. How much autonomy? You'll still make day-to-day decisions about operations and the children's care. But major expenditures will require foundation approval, and you'll need to maintain detailed records of everything: finances, educational progress, medical treatments, all of it. And if we don't meet their standards? Then funding gets pulled and you're back where you started. But Lily, here's the thing. What you're already doing exceeds most orphanages' standards by a wide margin. You just need to document it properly. Ethan looked at Lily, then at Samuel, who'd been listening from the doorway. What do you think? I think, Samuel said slowly, that pride is worth less than children's welfare. And if some rich man in Boston wants to help us help them, maybe we should let him. Lily nodded agreement. It means we could take more kids, help more people. Isn't that what matters? So Ethan signed the papers, and the Shaw Foundation's support transformed the Double C Ranch over the following year. The bunkhouse was expanded and improved, with proper beds and heating for winter. A schoolhouse was built, allowing more consistent education. The barn was repaired and expanded to accommodate more horses, And gradually, word spread about the ranch that took in broken children and helped them heal. They came in ones and twos at first, then more steadily. Children who'd aged out of orphanages with nowhere to go. Siblings who'd been separated and desperately wanted to stay together. Kids with disabilities that made them undesirable to adoptive families. Each one arrived scared and damaged in their own way, and each one found on the Double C something they'd never had. A place where being imperfect was acceptable, where hard work was valued over appearance, where family was built rather than born. Lily, now 15, had become the heart of the operation in ways even Ethan hadn't anticipated. She worked with every new arrival, helping them adjust, teaching them about the animals, showing them that their past didn't have to define their future. Her gift with horses had expanded into a gift with people, an ability to see past defenses and damage to the scared child underneath. "You're good at this," Mrs. Henderson told her one afternoon, watching Lily coax a newly arrived girl out of her shell. "Better than most adults who do this work professionally." I just remember what it felt like, being so scared that everything seems dangerous, even kindness. Someone helped me past that. I'm just returning the favor. It's more than that. You have empathy, Lily, the ability to truly understand what others are feeling. That's rare, and it's valuable. The ranch now housed 18 children, ranging from 6 to 16 years old. They worked together, studied together, ate together, a patchwork family stitched together from pieces that hadn't fit anywhere else. They weren't perfect. There were fights and tears and failures, but there was also laughter and achievement and the slow, steady progress of healing. On Lily's 16th birthday, Ethan presented her with something she'd never expected: legal papers showing that the ranch would be hers when he died, along with the responsibility of continuing its mission. "I'm not planning on dying anytime soon," he said with a slight smile, "but I want you to know that what we've built here isn't temporary. It's your legacy as much as mine. Maybe more, since you're the one who really made it work." Lily looked at the papers, feeling the weight of trust they represented. "What if I can't do it? What if I'm not good enough?" "You're already good enough. You've been good enough since the day I found you under that mesquite tree, too stubborn to give up even when the world had given up on you." He pulled her into an embrace. "You taught me something, Lily. You taught me that saving one person can change the world, because that one person goes on to save others. You saved me from grief, and now you're saving these kids from hopelessness. That's a legacy worth having." As the years continued to pass, the Double C Ranch became something of a legend in the territory. The place where broken children went to heal, where a girl with a twisted leg had built a sanctuary from nothing but determination and compassion, where a hardened cowboy had learned that the greatest legacy wasn't land or cattle, but the lives you touched and changed. Lily was 19 when she took her first trip away from the ranch, traveling to Austin to speak at a conference about child welfare. She stood before an audience of educators, social reformers, and government officials, leaning on the crutch that had become as much a part of her as her own arm, and told her story. She told them about being abandoned on a roadside, about a man who'd chosen to stop when he could have ridden past, about learning that worth wasn't measured in physical perfection, but in strength of character. And she told them about the dozens of children who'd found homes and purpose at the Double C Ranch, proving that with proper support and genuine care, every child could thrive regardless of their past. The speech was met with standing applause, and afterward a dozen organizations approached her about replicating the ranch's model in other states. The idea that had started with one man's kindness and one girl's resilience was spreading, changing the way people thought about orphaned and disabled children. When Lily returned to the ranch, she found the children had prepared a celebration. They'd hung decorations in the dining hall, baked a cake using precious sugar, and created a banner that read "Welcome Home" in uneven letters that spoke of effort and love. "We wanted to show you," Sarah said, now 21 and working as Lily's assistant in training horses, "that you're just as important to us as we are to you." Lily looked around at the faces gathered there. Thomas, now 16 and apprenticing with a blacksmith in town, but still living at the ranch. Michael, who'd grown into a confident 12-year-old with a gift for mathematics. The newer children, still learning to trust but beginning to bloom under consistent care. And Ethan and Samuel, both grayer and slower than they'd once been, but still the foundation everything else was built on. "I'm the lucky one," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every single day, I wake up grateful that Mr. Cole stopped on that road. Grateful that he saw something worth saving in a girl everyone else had given up on. And grateful that all of you let me be part of your lives, part of your healing. That evening, after the celebration had ended and the children were in bed, Lily walked out to Ghost Corral. The stallion was 20 years old now, his muzzle gray and his movements slower than they'd once been. But he still came when she called, still rested his head against her chest, still found peace in her presence the way he had from the beginning. "We did it," she whispered to him. "We survived. We healed. We built something that matters." Ghost nickered softly, and Lily could have sworn she heard understanding in the sound. She thought about the girl she'd been, broken, terrified, convinced she was worthless because her body didn't work the way other people's did. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong, purposeful, using her own pain as a bridge to help others cross from suffering to hope. And she thought about Ethan's words from years ago, about how saving one person could change the world. He'd saved her. She'd saved others. And those others would go on to save still more, ripples spreading outward from a single choice made on a dusty Texas road. The screen door creaked, and Ethan emerged from the house, moving more stiffly than he once had, but still solid and strong in the ways that mattered. "Thought I'd find you here. Just saying goodnight to an old friend." Ethan joined her at the fence, both of them watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking about the future, about what happens when I'm gone and you're running this place yourself. You're not going anywhere for a long time. Maybe, maybe not. But either way, I want you to know something." He turned to face her, his weathered face gentle in the twilight. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Lily. Better than this ranch, better than anything I built or owned or accomplished. Finding you, raising you, watching you become who you are. That's what made my life matter. You understand?" Lily felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears. Healing tears. "I understand, and I want you to know that you gave me everything. Not just life, but a reason to live it. A purpose beyond just surviving." They stood together in the gathering dark, father and daughter not by blood, but by choice, bound together by a chance encounter that had changed both their lives immeasurably. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with lamplight, filled with children who'd found their way home against impossible odds. Around them, the Texas land stretched vast and unforgiving, beautiful in its harshness. And above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal patterns, witnessing the small miracles that happened every day when people chose compassion over convenience, when they stopped for those in need rather than passing by. The girl who'd been left to die on a lonely roadside had become a woman who built sanctuaries for the abandoned. The man who'd been hollowed out by grief had found purpose in giving others the chances his own daughter never got. And together, they'd proven that the most powerful force in the world wasn't wealth or strength or perfect ability. It was simply the choice to care when caring was difficult, to love when love seemed risky, to build family from fragments others had discarded. As the last light faded from the sky and the ranch settled into peaceful night, Lily made her way back to the house with Ethan beside her, Ghost watching from his corral, and the future spreading before her full of possibility and purpose. She'd been saved by one man's kindness on one scorching Texas afternoon, and she'd spent her life multiplying that kindness, proving that a single act of compassion could echo across time and lives, changing the world one rescued soul at a time. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.